Welcome to the Harris County Flood Control District's virtual community engagement meeting to discuss the Cloverleaf Area Drainage Improvements Project. If you would like to follow along in Spanish, the translated presentation is available for download at the bottom of this webpage. Si desea seguir la reunión en español, puede descargar la presentación traducida en la parte inferior de esta página web. This virtual community meeting is being offered by the Flood Control District to share vital information with the community and to gather your input on flood risk reduction efforts in your area. Community engagement is a critical component of our work, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us this evening. My name is Cristal Ramirez with the Flood Control District Communications team. I am joined tonight by a team of Flood Control District leadership and subject matter experts to ensure we continue to keep you up to date on important flood mitigation efforts. We are glad to see the community engage with this project and look forward to gathering your feedback tonight. Moving forward, we will continue to share updates on this and other projects in your area to keep you involved and informed. First, we would like to begin tonight's meeting with remarks from Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner Adrian Garcia.
Hello, everybody. I'm Adrian Garcia, Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner. Thank you to the Harris County Flood Control District for hosting this community engagement meeting. Before we begin, I want to send a sincere thank you to everyone for taking time to join us this evening. I want to thank you, our Precinct 2 residents, because I know that you are here to receive some important information, and I want you to know that we are here to work for you. Tonight, you are here to learn about the Cloverleaf Area Drainage Improvements Project. This project will improve the internal drainage systems and related infrastructure that convey stormwater from the Cloverleaf subdivision to Carpenter's Bayou. This project was identified by a Carpenter's Bayou watershed planning effort that the Harris County Flood Control District completed back in 2021. The planning effort evaluated flooding concerns in the area and recommended potential projects to reduce the risk of flooding in the Carpenter's Bayou watershed. We know that this is a top concern for families who have been repeatedly impacted by flooding in this area. Construction of Part 1 is expected to start in the fall of 2023. Part 2 of the project is expected to start the design stage in early 2024. As a part of my new Revive to Thrive initiative, this flood prevention effort will help protect your community, your businesses, and your neighbors, and make a major step toward ensuring there are fair and equitable opportunities for communities throughout Precinct 2. With Revive to Thrive, our goal is to focus on revitalization rather than gentrification by empowering communities and creating opportunities for our existing neighborhoods to be more resilient, inclusive, and thriving. With the right investments, resources, infrastructure, commitment, and community involvement, we can all progress and thrive. Harris County works best when all communities thrive. I'm proud to be from Precinct 2, and I want everyone to know this community is the greatest place to live, work, and play in Harris County, Texas. This is one of many flood mitigation projects happening within Precinct 2 aimed at improving our drainage systems to help minimize the impact of major rain events. Quality infrastructure is not only my responsibility as your county commissioner, but also one of my top priorities. Therefore, I've tasked my team to take action and demonstrate real progress to address our community's needs with projects that make a difference and make us better prepared to weather the next storm. I hope you will continue to stay engaged in this process. It's important to remember that your voice, your experiences, and your opinions do matter. If you need to get in touch with my office, please visit our website at hcp2.com or call us at 713-274-2222 or simply follow us on every major social media platform. Our doors are always open, and my team and I are happy to support you in whatever we can. Thank you again for being here tonight, and have a great meeting. And again, thank you for being a part of tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. We appreciate you sharing remarks. This virtual meeting will begin with a presentation to share an update on the Cloverleaf Drainage Improvement Project, timeline, and next steps. The presentation will be followed by a virtual question and answer session with Flood Control District team members, where we'll respond to your questions and comment on some of the frequently asked questions we receive from the public. Attendees will be able to submit comments and questions through the website or by phone. Any comments not addressed during the Q&A session will receive a response from the Flood Control District after the close of the comment period. Instructions on how to participate in the virtual meeting are included on this slide, on this virtual meeting webpage, and on the Flood Control District's website. I will also share a reminder of these instructions when we reach the Q&A portion of the meeting. We will now transition to Melissa Meyer, Interim Engineering Division Director with the Flood Control District, who will share information about the Flood Control District and this project. Melissa, over to you.
Thank you, Christelle, and a special thanks to each of you for joining us here tonight. In this presentation, we'll give a brief overview of this project. But before we get into project specifics, we'd like to share a bit of background information about the Flood Control District. The Harris County Flood Control District is a special purpose district created by the Texas legislature in 1937 in response to devastating floods that hit the Houston area in 1929 and 1935. The Flood Control District is governed by the Harris County Commissioners Court and works closely with other entities in our region, such as the Harris County Engineering Department and the City of Houston. This organization was created in part to serve as a local partner to leverage federal funding for flood damage reduction projects. Our mission has expanded since our founding, leading to billions of dollars in federal, state, and locally funded infrastructure improvements in the ground. The mission of the Harris County Flood Control District is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. One of the most difficult challenges we face is constructing effective projects that are sensitive to community and natural values in highly urbanized areas. Harris County includes 23 main watersheds, each totaling approximately 1,800 square miles and more than 2,500 linear miles of channel. 2,500 linear miles of channel is approximately the distance from New York to California. A watershed is a geographical region of land that drains to a common channel or outlet, and each watershed has its own unique characteristics and needs. The project we are presenting on tonight is in the Carpenter's Bayou watershed, located in the eastern part of Harris County. So Harris County and our surrounding area is flood prone for a number of reasons. Namely, we experience extreme rainfall events, including tropical storms and hurricanes. Our area is largely made up of flat, slow draining lands, and we see large concentrations of clay soils that do not soak up excess rainfall quickly. While the Flood Control District plays a critical role in flood risk reduction, we are one of several entities involved in these efforts in our regions. When rain falls on your roof, it flows through several jurisdictions, such as streets and drains managed by the Harris County Engineering Department, a municipal utility district, or a city such as the City of Houston, before it flows into a larger channel, creek, or bayou that the Flood Control District owns and maintains. This slide illustrates the various jurisdictions, which sometimes we even share with other entities. Inside neighborhoods, as shown on the left side of this illustration, storm sewers and roadside ditches collect stormwater runoff and start the process of moving it away from homes and streets. Storm sewers and roadside ditches are usually the responsibility of the local municipality. The project we are presenting on tonight, however, does blur these jurisdictional lines, as a flood control district typically does not design projects for local drainage improvements. The larger bayous and channels that take the collected stormwater and move it through our drainage system to Galveston Bay are the responsibility of the flood control district, and this is shown on the right side of the illustration. In the middle is a stormwater detention basin, sometimes constructed by the flood control district. When storm sewers on the left are increased, this creates an increase in runoff. And since it's our policy to avoid any adverse impacts from our projects, Detention basins help to safely take in and temporarily store excess stormwater during heavy rain events. Often we partner with Harris County precincts, utility districts, and others to add recreational amenities such as trails to these basins and along our channel. On August 25th, 2018, Harris County voters approved $2.5 billion in bonds for flood risk reduction projects. This vote followed a series of 23 meetings with community members across Harris County, one per watershed, which resulted in a list of what is now 181 bond projects. 38 of those projects were added directly as a result of community input. The actual timing of each individual project will depend on a variety of factors, including environmental permitting, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocation, and in some cases, requirements of a particular grant. Project lists and projected schedules are updated regularly on our website. As projects move forward, we're making significant progress towards resilience in Harris County. We shared an update with Harris County Commissioners Court in January of this year, and we highlighted a few notable stats. We've completed or closed 27 projects. We have secured $1.43 billion in partnership funding to stretch the bond funds even further for our community. And we've hosted more than 180 community engagement meetings. Your input is critical to our efforts, and we want to ensure our conversations continue. We'll continue these biannual updates moving forward to share progress on the program. While the bond was for $2.5 billion, the full cost of every project in the bond tables is almost $5 billion. So we made it clear from the outset that we would need funding partners to fully construct the projects in the bond program. As I've mentioned, we've had some success so far, having secured more than $1.43 billion in partner funds for projects across the county. And this graphic illustrates the many sources of those partnerships, including federal, state, and local funding that the Flood Control District is working to secure for Harris County. Each agency has its own definition of eligible projects and its own requirements for local match funding, so the Flood Control District works diligently to match projects to the right partnership opportunities. We'll now move into the part of the program that's specifically about the Cloverleaf Area Drainage Improvements Project. As a reminder, we're looking for your input as we discuss this project in more detail. Please feel free to drop any questions or comments into the comment box or to comment via phone by pushing the star key. Let's begin with a bit of background on this project. The 2018 Flood Control Bond Program funded a Carpenter's Bayou watershed planning study to identify areas and sources of inundation and evaluate potential flood risk reduction projects in the Carpenter's Bayou watershed. The planning study was completed in 2021 and resulted in a Carpenter's Bayou watershed plan, which made recommendations for major stormwater infrastructure improvements in the watershed. Also in 2021, the Flood Control District was awarded a $9.4 million grant for the construction of a flood risk reduction project in the Cloverleaf area from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Program, or CDBG MITS for shorts. This is an example of partnership funding I mentioned earlier, working closely with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Texas General Land Office, which administers the funds to our state. Even though the Flood Control District does not typically design projects for local drainage improvements, this grant created a unique opportunity for the Flood Control District to perform local drainage improvement work. The resulting project we are sharing with you tonight considered alternatives for drainage, stormwater conveyance improvements, and stormwater storage solutions for appropriate mitigation. Now let's take a look at the location of this flood risk reduction project. The Cloverleaf Area Drainage Improvements Project is located in the northern portion of the Cloverleaf subdivision in the Carpenter Bayou watershed. The neighborhood is located northwest of the intersection of Interstate 10 with Beltway 8, just west of Carpenter's Bayou. The Flood Control District formally identifies Carpenter's Bayou as Unit N100-00-00. The bayou flows under the Beltway before turning back to the east, where it eventually drains into the Houston Ship Channel. The map on this slide shows how stormwater flows in the project area. Drainage in this area primarily consists of roadside ditches, roadway culverts, and driveway culverts. There are only a few storm sewers in the project area, and the majority of stormwater is collected and moves through roadside ditches and primarily drains directly to Carpenter's Bayou. Analysis shows that structures that have previously flooded in the area are mostly affected from sheet flow. A sheet flow is stormwater that flows over land before making its way to a roadside ditch, storm sewer, tributary, or bayou. Frequently, sheet flow occurs when rainfall exceeds storm sewer or roadside ditch capacity, and the stormwater can become deep enough to inundate structures. Flood risk in the project area is also increased due to insufficient drainage capacity of the older drainage infrastructure. We talked about how stormwater flows within the project area and why the area has an increased flood risk. The map on the left shows existing conditions for 1% rainfall events. In that size of a rainfall event, which is 18 inches in 24 hours, it is modeled that there would be 205 acres of inundation with 209 flooded structures and 7.4 miles of flooded roadway. The map on the right shows existing conditions for 50% rainfall events. In that size of a rain event, which is 5.3 inches in 24 hours, it is modeled that there would be 137 acres of inundation with 44 flooded structures and 3.2 miles of flooded roadway. We've been working on a plan to help reduce the risk of flooding in the Cloverleaf neighborhood. In this presentation, I'll first tell you about the plan as a whole, and then I'll explain how the project is expected to be implemented in 2 phases. The full Cloverleaf area drainage improvement project would improve some of the internal drainage systems and related infrastructure that conveys stormwater from the Cloverleaf subdivision to Carpenter's Bayou. To do that, certain roadside ditches and driveway culverts in the neighborhood will be desilted, regraded, and/or resized to increase their capacity to carry stormwater out of the neighborhood. The images on this slide illustrate the existing condition of many of the roadside ditches in the neighborhood. In addition to the improvements to the neighborhood ditches, the full project includes the construction of an underground drainage culvert designed to convey stormwater out of the neighborhood. Inlets within the ditches along the location of the box culvert would capture stormwater runoff from the Cloverleaf area and convey it more quickly out of the neighborhood. The image on this slide shows you an example of the size of one section of box culvert. Improvements to the roadside drainage ditches ultimately will be made in the northern part of the neighborhood within the area bounded by Alderson Street to the north, Hershey Street to the south, Hollywood Street to the west, and Sam Houston Tollway to the east. The proposed recommendation for improving drainage conditions within Cloverleaf involves the rehabilitation and subsequent improvement of Nancy Rose Street as a primary drainage corridor. Let's talk for a moment about the impact of these improvements and the concept of mitigation. As I mentioned earlier, improvements to storm sewers or neighborhood drainage systems create an increase in the water moving downstream. That is, the amount of stormwater is traveling more quickly and efficiently out of the neighborhood. This increased amount of stormwater ultimately flows to Carpenter's Bayou. The flood control district is what we call a no adverse impact agency, and that means that we will never take a flooding problem from one area and move it to another. In this instance, we cannot allow increased flows from the drainage improvements in the neighborhood to impact Carpenter's Bayou in such a way that areas and homes downstream receive more water than the channel can handle in those areas. To offset the impact of drainage improvements and increased flows, we need to mitigate for the improvements. One way to provide mitigation for drainage improvements is to build a stormwater detention basin. A stormwater detention basin provides temporary storage for excess stormwater during heavy rain events. When the stormwater levels within the channels recede, the stored stormwater in the detention basin drains back into the channel by gravity via outfall pipes appropriately sized to drain the basin safely. When we talk about stormwater detention basins, we talk about how much stormwater they can hold in a unit of measure called acre feet. That measure refers to the volume of 1 foot deep over 1 acre. For context, 1 acre foot equals 325,851 gallons. Think of 1 football field covered with 1 foot of water. To mitigate for the drainage improvements in this project, a stormwater detention basin with a minimum storage capacity of 113 acre feet would be required to avoid impacts of the increased flow into Carpenter's Bayou. Property acquisition would therefore be required in order to build a stormwater detention basin large enough to mitigate for the local drainage improvements. Stormwater detention basins are the flood control district's typical approach to mitigation. However, in some instances where land is not available to the flood control district to construct a stormwater detention basin of an appropriate size, engineers consider alternative mitigation options. At this time, engineers are still in the process of determining a viable and appropriate mitigation option for this drainage improvements project. I mentioned earlier that this project is expected to be completed in 2 phases, and that's partly due to the timing needed to continue investigation into mitigation and potentially for property acquisition if a stormwater detention basin is to be constructed. With the phased approach, drainage work on some of the streets in the area can be done simultaneously with the property acquisition process or further mitigation analysis. The plan would be for the drainage work on the remaining streets in the project area to be done after the construction of the stormwater detention basin or identification of other appropriate mitigation. The project team conducted a hydraulics and hydrology analysis to determine which roadside ditches and driveway culverts in the neighborhood can be desilted, regraded, and/or resized without creating an adverse impact. And by adverse impact, again, we mean moving the problem elsewhere or making an issue worse elsewhere. That is, what drainage work can be done without the mitigation element in place. Based on that analysis, the first phase of the project will include drainage improvements on Alderson, Forest, Gainesville, and Longview streets. Those property owners will receive advance notice as to when construction will occur on their street. Sections of the box culvert will also be installed during phase 1. However, that box culvert will need to have a restrictor in place until a mitigation solution is implemented in phase 2. As with any construction project, there may be construction inconveniences. However, once completed, in addition to better local drainage infrastructure, any driveways, mailboxes, or streets impacted by the project will be replaced with materials consistent with what existed before the work began. The second phase of the project is tied to the mitigation solution determined for the project. Once determined, phase 2 will include constructing the mitigation solution, desilting, regrading, and/or resizing the remaining roadside ditches and driveway culverts, installing the final sections of the box culvert, and finally removing the restrictor on the box culvert. We will keep the community updated on the progress of phase 2 as we have a better sense of timing and the path forward. Now let's revisit the inundation maps for a visual of the benefits expected after phase 1 of the project is completed. The map on the left shows the inundation for a 1% rainfall event, and the map on the right shows the area of inundation for a 50% rainfall event. And here are the expected benefits by the numbers. For the 1% rainfall event, which is 18 inches in 24 hours, it is modeled that there would be 186 acres of inundation, which is a reduction of 19 acres, 134 flooded structures, which is a reduction of 75 structures, and 6.08 miles of flooded roadway, which is a reduction of 1.32 miles of roadway inundation. For the 50% rainfall event, which is 5.3 inches in 24 hours, it is modeled that there would be 62 acres of inundation, which is a reduction of 75 acres, 3 flooded structures, which is a reduction of 41 structures, and 0.57 miles of flooded roadway, which is a reduction of 2.63 miles of roadway inundation. So let's take a look at where the project is today. This graphic shows our typical project life cycle. The design was recently completed for phase 1, and the project is now entering the construction stage. So what's next? As we've stated, property acquisition in support of this project could be necessary. However, home buyouts are not a consideration at this time. The project went to bid in late March, and construction of phase 1 is expected to begin in fall of 2023 and is expected to last about 12 months. As details of the construction plan become available, we'll share that information with the community. This will include details on timing, sequencing, and traffic control plans as appropriate. Phase 2 would be expected to begin after completion of analysis and determination of a mitigation solution. The Community Development Block Grant funding requires the work to be complete in June of 2024. Therefore, we will complete as many of the components of the project as possible to adhere to this schedule. We'll continue to update the project webpage at www.hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf. And I will now turn the program back over to Christelle to kick off the Q&A.
Thanks, Melissa. Before we move into the Q&A, I want to share a quick reminder that we're looking for your input. We'd love to hear from you on this and other projects moving forward across Harris County. Your input is critical as we continue to develop project plans for this and other flood risk reduction efforts. All comments and questions received this evening will be considered as we develop plans for this effort, but the conversation doesn't end here. To learn more about this project, ask questions, and sign up for our mailing list, please visit hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf. As a reminder, there are 3 ways to submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. Submit a comment on this site in the box near the presentation live stream. Submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf. Or submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801, utilizing meeting code 6205. If you are joining us via phone tonight, please press star to leave a message. Additionally, I want to reiterate that any questions not addressed during tonight's Q&A will receive a response from the Flood Control District following the close of the comment period. Questions received in Spanish tonight will be answered to the best of our ability. You can expect a thorough response in writing after the close of the public comment period. Information from this meeting and a recording of the live stream will be available on the Flood Control District's website and YouTube channel. Joining Melissa for our Q&A session tonight is Brandy Zenon, Manager of the Capital Projects North Department. Now it's time to take some of your questions. This question is for Brandy. Anthony is asking about the mitigation for this project and if land has been identified for stormwater detention basin.
Hi, Anthony. That's a good question. For phase 1, we develop a scope that does not require any mitigation at this time. For part 2, which includes the remaining improvements for the area, we're still identifying and working through the mitigation solutions. So at this time, we have not identified the land for stormwater detention basin, or if that is going to be the only option for mitigation for this ultimate project.
Thank you. This question is for Melissa. Can you talk more about how this project was identified?
Sure. The 2018 Flood Control Bond Program funded a Carpenter's Bayou watershed planning study to identify areas and sources of inundation in the watershed and evaluate potential flood risk reduction projects in the watershed. That study was completed back in 2021 and resulted in the Carpenter's Bayou Watershed Plan, which made the recommendations for major stormwater infrastructure improvements in the watershed. Also in 2021, the Flood Control District was awarded a $9.4 million grant for the construction of a flood risk reduction project in the Cloverleaf area from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Program. which we also call CDBG-MIT for short. And this funding provided a unique opportunity for the flood control district to perform local drainage improvement work to contribute to the flood risk reduction in this area.
Thank you. This question is for Brandy. Can you give us a general idea about the goal of this project?
The goal of this project is to make improvements to the internal drainage systems and related infrastructure to convey stormwater from the Cloverleaf subdivision to Carpenter's Bayou to help reduce flood risk in the area.
Thank you, Brandy. We will stick with you for the next question. Can you describe the exact area for the project?
Yes, so the entire study area is in the northern part of the Cloverleaf neighborhood, where Alderson Street is the north limit of the project study area, which is west of the Beltway 8. And the southern portion is Hershey Street. For part one, the limits includes Alderson Street, as well as Glenville Street, Longview Street, Nancy Rose Street.
Thank you. Many of you likely have questions about this project. Affects your specific property. Please continue to submit your questions tonight, and we will get back with you about your specific questions related to your home. Okay, back to some questions for the experts we have with us tonight. Brandy, can you explain why the Cloverleaf neighborhood has local drainage issues?
Yes, that's a really good question. The drainage in this area primarily consists of roadside ditches, roadway culverts, and driveway culverts. There are only a few storm sewers in the project area. The majority of the storm water is collected and moves through the roadside ditches into Carpenter's Bayou. Over time, the capacity of these roadway ditches is reduced as they become overgrown and filled with silt and sediment. In addition, older infrastructure was built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, was designed to the standards at that time. Over time, the intensity and the duration of the rainfall in our region has increased significantly in the past decades. Aging infrastructure simply cannot accommodate the adequate drainage that's needed for this neighborhood.
Thank you, Brandy. Melissa, we have an education opportunity here. Can you please define what sheet flow means?
Sure. So due to the flat terrain in our region and the design of the older street networks, when there's an intense rainfall, older storm sewer systems may not contain all of the rainwater draining into them. So rainfall not being contained in a storm sewer system may overflow into the streets. Streets sometimes serve as above ground channels, which convey stormwater as it sheet flows to the nearby channels.
Thank you, Melissa. Anthony, we have received your request and we will have someone from the project team reach out to you. This question is for Melissa. Melissa, it is a bit unusual for our agency to tackle a local drainage project. Can you tell us how this came about?
Yeah, that's correct. The flood control district typically does not design projects for local drainage improvements. Storm sewers and roadside ditches are usually the responsibility of the local municipality. However, in this instance, funding secured in the Community Development Block Grant presented a unique opportunity for the flood control district to implement a project that was identified in the Carpenter's Bayou Watershed Plan to help reduce the flood risk in the area. With the potential for impact and flooding in place, the flood control decided to initiate this project.
Thank you for that. Melissa, I know you went over this in the presentation, but do you mind explaining the drainage improvements generally?
Sure. So drainage in this area consists primarily of roadside ditches, roadway culverts, and driveway culverts. Most of the ditches are overgrown and filled with silt and sediment, resulting in a reduced capacity and the associated infrastructure in the area is aging. This project would include desilting, regrading, and/or resizing many of the ditches and culverts in the neighborhood to increase their capacity to carry stormwater out of the neighborhood. Once completed, any driveways, mailboxes, or streets impacted by the project will be replaced with materials consistent with what existed before the work began. In addition to the roadside ditches and culverts, the project also includes the construction of an underground drainage culvert that's designed to capture stormwater runoff from the roadside ditches to convey it more quickly out of the neighborhood. A large box culvert will be installed along Nancy Rose and sections of Hillsborough to convey the stormwater out of the Cloverleaf area.
Thank you for your explanation, Melissa. Brandy, can you explain to our viewers tonight why we are doing this project in phases and not knocking it out all at once?
Yes, the decision to construct the project in phases comes down to really funding and timing. The community development block grant funding allows us to begin work so that the area can start seeing flood risk reduction in the near term. The grant actually requires flood control to complete a portion of the work by July 2024. However, we need to make sure that those improvements do not create an adverse impact to any other residents downstream of the Cloverleaf area. So we had to package a project together that can meet those two criteria of the funding that we will be receiving and will be able to meet the deadline that has been set in place for that funding. And so to determine the most appropriate and cost-effective way to mitigate the remaining of the drainage improvements in the neighborhood, we are still continuing to investigate those feasible options. So as we are investigating, as the investigation continues, we have the current opportunity to begin improving conditions for the residents in the area.
Thank you, Brandy. This question is for Melissa. Melissa, if stormwater detention basins are the flood control district's typical approach to mitigation, why not construct a basin for this project?
Yeah, the proposed drainage improvements in this area will require a mitigation solution with a minimum storage capacity of 113 acre-feet in order to avoid impacts of increased flows into Carpenter's Bayou. In this area, available property is very limited. The flood control district is continuing to investigate which parcels of land might be available, along with any other options which may provide the required storage capacity.
Thank you, Melissa. Melissa, you mentioned alternative mitigation solutions. Other than a stormwater detention basin, what are other mitigation options?
So when land's not available to the flood control district to construct a stormwater detention basin of an appropriate size, engineers could consider alternative options, and these can vary by project and location. Alternative options might include multiple smaller stormwater detention basins that together provide the required storage capacity, linear detention along a channel, or upsized underground storage with a box culvert itself. All of these options require extensive study to determine which are most appropriate for the project and its specific conditions.
Thank you. Melissa, this is for you as well. Jennifer is asking, so then sheet flow is about rain on the streets from the sky, not water coming out of the bayou, or can you clarify?
That is correct. Sheet flow is water coming out of the sky and basically not having anywhere to go. As Brandy had mentioned earlier, a lot of the existing aging infrastructure is filled with sediments. And so there's no way for the rain to go. So basically just sheet flows to wherever it can get. That's the main issue out in this area that we're trying to solve.
Thank you, Melissa. I think this is a good time to show the map of the phase 1 streets. Can we go get that slide up on the screen for our viewers? Melissa, I know folks are curious about property acquisition. Will there be any property acquisition needed?
So it's too soon to say until the investigation is complete. At this time, home buyouts are not a consideration. Property acquisition in support of this project could be necessary, and it'll depend on the identification of the most effective options for mitigation for the local drainage improvements. We'll know more about potential property acquisition during phase 2 of this project.
Thank you. Brandy, this is probably one of the most important questions that viewers will have tonight. How will construction of the phase 1 drainage improvements impact residents?
Good question. As with any construction project, there may be construction inconveniences within the area to the residents. Property owners will receive advance notice as to when the contractor or when construction will begin within the area and which streets will be impacted. At this time, it's too early to tell exactly what the details of the construction plan are. But once we have that information available, we will be able to publish that and provide that information to the community. This communication could include details on timing, sequencing, traffic control plans, and access to property as appropriate. Construction of the entire phase 1 is expected to last approximately 12 months, and we will be implementing a sequence timeline. That is, interruption on an individual street will not occur the entire time.
Thank you, Brandy. Melissa, you mentioned that the box culvert constructed in phase 1 will have a restrictor in place. What is a restrictor?
So a restrictor simply limits the amount of stormwater that will be allowed to flow into the box culvert and then ultimately drain into Carpenter's Bayou. Because the project ultimately requires appropriate mitigation for increased flow into Carpenter's Bayou, we'll need to limit that flow until the mitigation is in place. We can't move more stormwater into Carpenter's Bayou than it can handle without creating an adverse impact downstream. Therefore, the capacity of the box culvert will be temporarily limited. The box culvert will still be functional after the completion of phase 1 improvements and will still accept stormwater from the improved roadside drainage systems.
Thank you, Melissa. As a reminder, there are 3 ways to submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. Submit a comment on this site in the box near presentation live stream. Submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf, or submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801, utilizing meeting code 6205. If you are joining us via phone tonight, please press star to leave a message. Melissa, how is this project being funded? How much will it cost?
This project's an example of partnership funding between the 2018 bond program, which funded the Carpenter's Bayou Watershed Planning Study, and the resulting 2021 Carpenter's Bayou Watershed Plan, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Program, which awarded $9.4 million, a $9.4 million grant for phase 1 of this project. And additional funding will be required for phase 2 of the project.
Thank you, Melissa. Brandy, can you explain the benefits expected from the recommended improvements?
Yes, after the completion of phase 1 of the project, we expect to see reductions in the flooding and flooded structure. We expect to see reductions in flooding and flooded structures in the phase 1 and 2 area. For the 1% rainfall event, where 18 inches of rainfall falls in 24 hours, we expect to see a reduction of 19 acres of inundation. 75 fewer flooded structures, as well as 1.32 miles of flooded roadway removed for the 1% rainfall event. For the 50% rainfall event, where 5.3 inches of rain falls within 24 hours, we expect a reduction of 75 acres of inundation, 41 fewer flooded structures, and a reduction of flooding on 2.63 miles of roadway.
Thank you. Again, I know many of you are curious about your impacts, Brandy. How can residents find out if their home will be included in the improvements?
Yes, if we can show back okay, thank you. The streets that are included in phase 1 are Alderson Street, 4th Street, Gainesville Street, Longview Street. We are doing improvements along Nancy Road as well as Hillsborough. The impacted property owners will receive advance notice as to when the construction will occur on their particular street, along with the details of the timing, the sequence, what the traffic control plans are, and how they will be able to access their property.
Thank you. Brandy, this is also for you. Is this the first time the community has heard about this project?
Through the process required for the community development block grant, MID, or as we call it for short, CDBG MID funding, a public meeting was held in the Carpenters Bayou watershed in 2020. Tonight's meeting is the first time that we specifically talked about the Cloverleaf Drainage Improvements Project. Until now, updated project information has been posted on our website, which we will continue to make available for the community to go and look at the additional information about the project as needed. Additionally, the Flood Control District always welcomes any input on their projects, and you could make that input at www.hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf. And you just click the submit a comment to ask a question or provide project input. And someone from our team will get back with you for a response. Once the details for phase 2 are known, the Flood Control District will hold another community engagement meeting like this one to discuss the alternatives that were considered and what would be the recommended alternative to move forward for construction of phase 2.
Thank you, Brandy. I have another question for you, Brandy. What is the current stage of the project?
For phase 1, we are currently entering into the construction phase. We just completed design earlier this year, and we're transitioning into the construction phase. For phase 2, we are kicking off the design phase for that part of the project.
Thank you. And Brandy, this is for you as well.
Mm-hmm.
How long will it take to construct this project?
For phase 1, we're estimating that the project is looking to take approximately 12 months to complete, which falls in line with the deadlines that we have set in place for the grant funding that we receive. And we expect for the construction to start later this year, fall of this year. For phase 2, it's kind of too soon to determine how long construction will last for that project, but that information will be made available by the next community engagement meeting.
Thank you. Melissa, this is always a concern for Harris County residents. Will this project eliminate flooding in this area?
It's impossible to say that any one project will completely end flooding in an area. While the project will reduce the risk of flooding in the area, the risk of flooding will remain. The Flood Control District recommends that everyone in Harris County and surrounding areas have flood insurance to insure against the possibility of personal and financial loss. You can visit hcfcd.org/MAAPNEXT to learn about the Flood Control District's Map Next initiative, which aims to produce Harris County's most comprehensive and complete set of flood hazard maps and information.
Thank you. Melissa, You mentioned that we are a no impact agency. Can you explain what this means?
Yeah, so the Flood Control District is a no adverse impact agency. Project engineers must ensure that improvements made on one part of the watershed or channel will not increase flooding in another part of the watershed or channel. All new development within Harris County must comply with strict requirements for detention. Development criteria has been in place for the last 30 years, and it's always required for any development in the county. These development criteria require that all new developments mitigate for flooding and drainage impacts that might be caused as a result of the development.
Thank you. Melissa, while we have you, can you explain how does this project fit into the overall 2018 bond program?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Can you explain how does this project fit into the overall 2018 bond program?
Sure. The Flood Control District's mission is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. The 2018 bond program funded the Carpenters Bayou Watershed Planning Study, which resulted in the 2021 Carpenters Bayou Watershed Plan. And that plan made recommendation for major stormwater infrastructure improvements, such as the ones that are included in this project. The bond funding, in conjunction with partnership funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Program, work together for this project to reduce flooding risks to Harris County homes and communities.
Thank you, Melissa. For those that are just joining in, I want to remind you that there are 3 ways to submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. You can submit a comment on this site in the box near the presentation live stream. Submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf, or submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801, utilizing meeting code 6205. If you are joining us via phone tonight, please press star to leave a message. Additionally, I want to reiterate that any questions not addressed during tonight's Q&A will receive a response from the Flood Control District following the close of the comment period. Questions received in Spanish tonight will be answered to the best of our ability. You can expect a thorough response in writing after the close of the comment period. Information from this meeting and a recording of the live stream will be available on the Flood Control District's website and YouTube channel. For those asking where to find project updates, updates on this project will be posted to the project webpage at hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf. Melissa, we have another break in questions for an education moment. Can you do your best to explain what is a watershed?
Sure. So a watershed is just a geographical region of land that drains to a common channel or outlet. Here in Harris County, we have 23 main watersheds totaling approximately 1,800 square miles, and we have more than 2,500 linear miles of channel. The project we're talking about tonight is in the Carpenters Bayou watershed, which drains to Carpenters Bayou, which in turn drains to the Houston Ship Channel and ultimately out to Galveston Bay.
Thank you, Melissa. Melissa, this question is also for you. You say a stormwater detention basin is the Flood Control District's typical mitigation solution, but what is a stormwater detention basin?
Yeah, a stormwater detention basin provides temporary storage for excess stormwater during heavy rain events. When stormwater levels within the channel recede, the stored stormwater in the detention basin drains back into the channel by gravity via outfall pipes that are appropriately sized to drain the basin safely. We measured the volume of a stormwater basin in acre feet, which is a volume of water of 1 foot deep over 1 acre.
Thank you, Melissa. Brandy, this question is for you. We mentioned the concept of mitigation a lot. What does that mean, mitigation?
Mitigation is flood risk reduction projects that include channel and drainage of or conveyance improvements, creating increase in flow of water moving into or downstream in a channel. Think of a drainage improvements here, allowing more stormwater to flow more quickly and more efficiently from the Cloverleaf streets into Carpenter's Bayou. Because the flood control district is a no adverse impact agency, we will never take a flooding problem from one area and move it to another. To offset the improvements in this one area, we will need to mitigate for those improvements so they don't negatively impact another area or watershed. One way to mitigate for improvements is to temporarily hold the increased stormwater, such as in a stormwater detention basin, until the channel which will receive the water can in a way that it does not create flooding downstream.
Thank you. Brandy, staying on this topic of mitigation, we have a question come through asking about mitigation. If there isn't land found for the typical path of a detention basin, what happens to the project? Or is it simply too early to say at this point?
Well, we're still considering the mitigation solutions like it was mentioned earlier, but there are alternative solutions to mitigation other than stormwater detention. As mentioned, you can do linear detention, which is within the channel itself. You could have underground storage, like was previously shown on like with culvert boxes that could be sized to hold all of the increased flows for a time period before releasing the flows downstream. Another alternative is to do additional channel improvements that could store the water, the excess water within the channel that doesn't provide impacts. But for this particular project, we are still trying to evaluate and consider all options that we have and figure out what's the best solution for the ultimate project.
Thank you, Brandy. Can we go ahead and pull up the street in the project area again for our viewers? Thank you.
And since you have this up, and since we were just talking about mitigation, I just want to reiterate that for phase one, the improvements that we are moving forward with construction will not cause an impact downstream, which will not require any type of mitigation at this time.
Thank you for that thorough answer. And I want to remind everyone that we want to hear from you. If you are joining us, you can submit a comment on this site in the box near the presentation live stream. You can submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/Cloverleaf, or submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801, utilizing meeting code 6205. If you are joining us via phone tonight, please press star to leave a message. And see if we have any other questions come in. I really appreciate all the good work from our experts here tonight. And with that, I would like to share one final reminder that the comment period associated with this meeting runs through September 27th, but we're always looking for your input and engagement. We also encourage everyone to get flood insurance as flood season in Harris County runs year-round. Thank you again for joining us this evening and for providing your input on this project. We look forward to continuing to share updates as our work moves forward. Stay safe and have a good night.